The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman. Politically Speaking Election Edition is an interview with all of the candidates across the Bruce-grey-owensound riding, and today my guest is Anne-Marie Watson, who is the candidate for the Liberal Party. Anne-Marie, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great opportunity.
Well, indeed. One of the things that we've discovered in Bruce-grey-owensound this go-round in this federal election is that we've got a lot of new faces. And that's really interesting because having been around this circle a few times, it's always a pleasure to meet people who have stepped up, offered themselves for this particular kind of public service. I mean, this is your first go at elected office, is it not?
Yes, it is. I'm used to working behind the scenes. This is my third election, but I'm normally the door knocker and the fundraiser and working with volunteers, so behind the scenes, being the support. So this is a very new experience for me and a credible learning experience. What an opportunity.
So instead of having to make the candidate look good, you are the candidate.
And I'm still having to make the candidate look good.
Sure. Well, even with your political experience, what was your reason for saying yes when the party came knocking, or you offered yourself to the party?
So I think, like a lot of people, COVID gave me an opportunity to do a little introspection. And I was at a place in my life where I had some decisions to make. Did I want to stay in doing what I was doing? Could I do something more? Could I contribute a little bit more? Because I've always been committed to the community I live in. I absolutely love it here. I've worked with this community for 25 years in one capacity or another. And the opportunity presented itself to me to put up or shut up. And at that point, I had to make a decision and say, you know what? If I don't do it now, I may never. If I don't do it, who will? I am committed to this riding. I should give people the opportunity. I'm going to do my best job, and I'm going to get out there.
Sure. Now you've a farm background, if I'm not mistaken.
So yes, my husband and I still live on the family farm. It's a beef farm now in West Grey. He's one of those people that was dairy farming for most of his life, and when it was at a place where he needed to get a new hip. He won't mind me telling you that. And had some decisions to make. And like many dairy farmers, when they retire, they can't part from livestock. So he switched to beef farming. So we've been doing that for about 12 years, cow-calf to finish. And we're still doing that on the family farm.
Yes, I know well what farmers are like. It's you can take the farmer out of the country, but you can't take the farm out of the farmer.
Yes, yeah.
Now, but you also were working in the community as well, were you not?
So I am, and I still am actually, except for this campaign. So I've been working in the nonprofit sector for 25 years. Many people will recognize me from the Owen Sound and Bruce Peninsula area. I worked for the Women's Centre, the Canadian Red Cross, the Canadian Cancer Society, and then I did some consultant work for 2 years. And for the last 8 years, I've been the executive director of the Durham Hospital Foundation.
So you've got a real background in some of the social side of this area as well.
I do, and I really think it gives me an advantage because I feel like I have a foot in both worlds and have a good perspective or understanding of a lot of the issues. I know what the challenges are in the healthcare system. I work in the healthcare system. I've seen the need with housing. I've seen the need with hunger. I've worked with some of the First Nations populations in the area in my role, and I truly do see the problem, and I have hope that we can work together to resolve many of the issues.
Now, the Liberal Party has a particular platform for that plan for this country. Let's take a quick dive into some of that. And what's the economic recovery plan for the Liberal Party? Where do you see it having an impact on Bruce-grey-owensound?
So I think if I was going to roll up what our economic recovery plan is into a very short period sentence, it's put Canadians back to work. We don't believe in making cuts to help reduce the deficit. We believe in creating opportunities. So the million jobs that were lost due to COVID, we're going to regain them. In fact, we're almost regained those many lost jobs right now. Plus, we're going to create another 1 million jobs. So I think that that's going to be a huge, huge part of it. We're also going to be subsidizing people for going back to education and apprenticeship training. We're going to be providing the continuation of CERB, but as a declining amount until this economy has recovered and people actually don't need the financial support, that they are in a position to go back to work. We're going to continue to support small and mid-sized businesses with their wage subsidies so that they can then afford to keep the business going and hire back their employees. We're also going to provide incentives to them for any changes that they have to make. They may have to have new technology. They may have to have new practices. We're trying to build and enhance the wireless system throughout this riding because so many more people, thanks to COVID, have realized I can do this job from home. I don't have to add to the carbon footprint and drive back down to the GTA every day. But a real roadblock in that has been the poor wireless or the broadband connection. So it's all part and parcel of where we want to help Canadians get back to work. What it's going to do for Grey Bruce-Owensound, part of our hiring plan is within the health sector. We want to attract and recruit 7,500 more doctors across Canada. And if elected, I would fight for a significant number of those to come here to Grey Bruce. Working in physician recruitment, I am well aware of how many people do not have a doctor or a primary care provider. We also want to hire across the country 250,000 PSWs. Again, let's get those here. The Liberal Party has a plan to improve and increase the green economy and the green tech sector. We already have the hydrogen plant in Owen Sound as an example of what's possible in this riding. That tech is going to go out around the world. Let's add to that. Let's make Grey Bruce the green tech sector. So those are some of our points on that.
Sure. Now, COVID itself has brought about, as you say, a lot of change in Bruce-grey-owensound in Canada. And it's also exposed a significant amount of economic inequity in this country. What will your party do to address some of that? Let me give you a category: childcare. We know that one of the roadblocks to a good job in this area is childcare, lack of childcare. What would your party do to improve or increase the availability of childcare?
So excellent question, and I know it's front of a lot of people's minds. Because of our environment, we have that unique blend of a rural/urban environment. So not all the urban solutions from the GTA and that size community are going to be applicable here. But the one thing the Liberals want to do is over the next 5 years, have childcare reduced to $10 a day. Our leader has been strong on that. The MPs and the candidates have been strong on that, and that is a goal. I'm strong on that because I see just how much of a struggle our families are having to meet their childcare expenses. And quite frankly, if a family can't afford to have their children in daycare or any sort of early learning, they're going to have one parent at home. If they have a parent at home, they don't have somebody out in the workforce. That affects the entire income for that family and their ability to provide, to encourage other educational opportunities, to upgrade themselves. So that's a real challenge. So we also want to create a nationwide early childhood learning and daycare strategy so that the plans that we have go from coast to coast. They're just not province-wide. Will we work with the provinces? Absolutely on this. They have to be our partners in this and so many other things as well. So I mentioned earlier the challenge of rural childcare. So having been a mother raising kids on the farm, I'm well aware that it's not as easy as going 2 blocks away and having your child there in a daycare center or early learning, or gee, can I get them in a young JK? Because those aren't available to us. They're miles away. And sometimes a family member is available, but why should the family member that's going to help us with childcare be penalized by not having an income. Now we're expecting them to give up their potential for a job or an income or enjoying their retirement time because they have no choice but to provide care for their grandchildren. Well, if the families here were given the option of where to spend that money, the $10 a day, and we're able to reward our mothers, bless their hearts, for providing that childcare, or if several of us got together and we said, okay, so Sally over on the second concession has an incredible environment. She's willing to get licensed and create home childcare. Let's all 12 of us in the area that need this work with Sally to create this opportunity, and we can get our kids there. I think the most important element to me, because I see the farm fatality statistics every month, every day, we have to keep our kids out of the fields and off the equipment.
That's a very good point, because how many times do we hear here in the city we see the media reports of another child who has fallen off a tractor or been caught in a piece of equipment, and it's heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking, because
I know.
Let's face it, children are the future, not just in urban areas, but especially in rural areas.
Yeah, I was very fortunate when my kids were young and I had to be out in the fields working with my husband. So our mechanic's daughter was of the age where she could be a mother's helper, and he was willing to drive her out every day. So I hired a mother's helper, and yes, I paid her out of pocket, but she was a godsend because I knew she was at the house. My children were safe. They were entertained. They were going to still be alive when I got in off the field, and I could, with confidence, go and draw hay all day or go and help them with the harvest. And not everybody has that opportunity, and I'd like to work to resolve that.
And let's remember, cows are big and heavy and not always smart.
Yeah, I know. There's a funny story from my husband when he was young. He was one of 6 children, and they all came in from the barn, the ones that went, to time to sit down for supper. And his mother said to his father, "Where's Jim?" "Well, isn't he in here with you?" "Well, no, he was in the barn with you." So, of course, they rushed down to the barn. Every single cow is laying down for the night, having already been milked, except for one. He's asleep underneath her as a young kid.
Wow.
Oh.
So, I guess
and I'm sure we're not the only.
I guess the cow must have thought, geez, just another calf.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Very fortunate. Let's move on to another area, and that is, of course, COVID and the various public health measures that have been brought into place. Now, while many of them are provincial, there have been some federal public health measures like vaccination certificates, and the government did a lot of work on immunization with the provinces. What's your party's position on these public health measures that have had to be brought in?
So I don't think we've ever wavered on this, David. Our party stand is that everybody who can be immunized should be immunized. This is a once-in-a-century pandemic. This is not the common flu, and it is killing people. And when it's as easily resolved, prevented as having a vaccination, why would people not do it? And I'm running into people as I knock on doors, and I understand this is a very passionate, driven issue for people. But I was young, and you were young, and you remember getting stuck in the arm. We lined up at school, and we got our vaccinations, and our parents didn't protest, and we took it for granted. And we still have our smallpox vaccinations. And thanks to that, smallpox has been eradicated. And we got our little yellow vaccination cards with the dates and stuff, and the doctor would enter it in his file. And nobody thought twice of calling that a passport or infringing on our rights. It was a matter of pride. And I don't know when that perception changed, but it's a little bit concerning to me that at a time when we should have been pulling together as people and as a country and showing caring for each other, this one issue has blown the country apart and set neighbor against neighbor and divided families. So rather than demonizing the virus, we're demonizing each other's perspectives. And like the party, we want to be able to move past that because our greater goal is the health and safety of all Canadians, children, health challenged, seniors, people who can't take the vaccination need to be protected by those who can do it.
Sure. Now, this kind of raises you spoke of the divisions that we were experiencing. This does raise some of the issues that actually are as current as the headlines. That the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, has been assaulted with stones in a recent rally and had to cancel a rally. Mr. Bernier, Maxime Bernier of the PPC, was egged. Mr. Singh has reported various insults based on his religion and his race. And Anime Paul has also reported similar incidents as a woman. And we know that there is an increase in acts of hate, acts of gender violence, Islamophobia in Canada. What's the party say, what does your platform say about these incidents? And how do you plan to work towards a more just and fair society?
I have to agree. We've all seen this surge in hate, and it's not just the COVID and the vaccinations that are doing it. We've seen an uprise or an uptick in assaults and language and racism and bigotry against, in the sector that I work on, the nonprofit sector, there's an expression called BIPOC, and it's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it has seriously targeted those people. The Asians, when this virus was first determined to have originated in China, it didn't matter whether you were of Chinese descent or not. If you were even perceived to be of Asian background, they were victims of hate attacks and crimes as well. So we're seeing it around the world. We're seeing it in North America. We're seeing it here in Canada. And I think Canadians, being such by nature a more reconciliatory, polite society, it's very appalling and hurtful to an awful lot of us. So we have a national action plan on combating hate that we're going to implement by 2022. They're working on the creation of it now, but there's an awful lot of elements that are going to be effective, or we hope that are going to be effective. We have, it's part of a renewed anti-racism strategy. We will continue to take meaningful steps to combat racism and discrimination in all aspects. So we want to strengthen and boost funding to this strategy. We want to build on the progress left over from the last 6 years. We want to increase funding to the multicultural community. We want to, I'm just thinking about all the different things here. We want to strengthen our anti-hate legislation and make the penalties worth the crime. When you talked about the stone throwing incident, it was really upsetting to me that the people who were doing it were proudly wearing T-shirts proclaiming their affinity with a group. What we haven't heard is, were those people charged? Were those people arrested? What was the fallout? Because hate crimes are a crime in this country and should be penalized. To spin off from there, we want to talk about online harms, because not only are these people throwing rocks in person and hurling epithets in your face, they're doing it online. And we've seen the increase in suicides and mental health issues and depression from online hate campaigns. This is the next step up, I call it, from bullying. And the internet has created a perfect opportunity because it provides anonymity to it. So we want to introduce legislation that will combat the serious hate-filled online content. We want to provide support for the survivors of hate-motivated crimes. Personally, I would like to see those people, the perpetrators, held responsible for their actions, and they should be the ones that are funding the programs that are used to help the survivors. I think in a nutshell, it's like saying, this is enough, we're not going to stand for it anymore, and the rest of us have to stand up. For many years, I was involved with the Women's Center, which is a violence against women organization, and we knew then that the key solution and the biggest factor in solving this was for other men to speak up and make it not acceptable. So I think in this racism and hate-filled time, we need more calm and cool-headed people to stand up and say, stop, that's enough.
You make some very good points, certainly about the connection with violence towards women, as some of our MPs in the previous Parliament experienced directly.
Mhm.
And we're certainly no stranger to Islamophobia and hatred here in this riding, certainly in Owen Sound, the last about a year ago. Let's move on to another, dare I say it, hot topic, which is climate change. And we have been put on notice that we've reached a tipping point in terms of our climate change. We have to make changes soon. What is your party's platform on climate change?
So our party's platform is climate change is real, it's an emergency, and we have to deal with it. No more putting off until tomorrow. We've seen the wildfires out in the west. We've seen the drought in the prairies, heat waves here across the eastern part, Ontario and the eastern part of the country. We've seen massive floods and earthquakes around the world. This isn't a one day if it kind of a scenario anymore. And this, despite what a lot of people seem to think, this is not a natural phenomenon. This is man-made. We've had scientists screaming the alert now for many, many years. And it's ironic to me that so many people are saying, oh, yes, we have to do something about climate change and the government should act on that. Oh no, don't ask me to drive my car less. What do you mean I can't have a Hummer or an Escalade or something else? And it's like not in my backyard, but on a much more intimate level. So no, our government's going to take a stand on this, because not only is this the single greatest threat of our lifetime, it's the single greatest opportunity to make a difference now, so that what we're handing down to our grandchildren is not going to be toxicity and pollution and a shortened lifespan. So what are the few things we want to do? We want to create new middle-class jobs and encourage many of those jobs to be in the green tech sector. We want to help industries adopt the technology that will cut pollution and allow them to move forward with an emissions-reduced or an emissions-free environment. We want to make sure that all of the workers that may be left behind from the change are not left behind. So we want to create green tech jobs and offer retraining so that nobody is left behind. We're going to provide up to $5,000 in funding for people who want to convert to an electric car, because that's going to make a huge difference to this country. We want to build 50,000 more electric car charging units across this country so that it's a more logical choice for people to be able to buy a green car. It's one thing to say, oh, I can plug it at home in my garage when I get home. Well, what happens after you drove to your job in Mississauga? What are you going to do there? So we need to help there. We want to make sure that all passenger vehicles sold in Canada have to be zero emission by 2030, and all of them have to be zero emissions by 2035. We want, we want to cut pollution by building a net zero electricity grid by 2035. We want to drive down emissions from oil and gas to meet our net zero emission goal by 2050. We want to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies in 2 years instead of 4. We're going to continue to phase out coal by ending thermal coal exports. So we're going to make a significant investment in this. We're going to reward people for their initiatives. We're also going to work with agriculture, which is something that people don't think. Agriculture is not the environment's enemy. Agriculture is its single biggest supporter. I mean, we're talking about creating carbon sequestering so that we can help reduce the emissions. And I'm looking at your backdrop, and trees produce a huge, significant amount of that. But trees are a one-time crop. They're going to continue to grow. Whereas agriculture, on the other hand, every single year, the farmers are planting 1 or 2 green crops. They're using cropping techniques such as cover crops. They're planting trees. They're doing creek setbacks. They're planting grass runways. Everything that a farmer plants provides carbon sequestering. We need to work with the farmers, and instead of penalizing them with carbon taxes, we're going to allow them an opportunity to recoup the monies they've spent on those taxes by giving them incentives towards creating these sequestering opportunities. So we need to look for alliances, look for collaborations, and work for this solution together.
That's helpful to hear. Always helpful to hear, but particularly in relation to agriculture. Let's move the dial a little bit and talk about residential schools. awareness, I don't want to use the word discovery, but the awareness of bodies on the sites of Indian residential schools now closed has prompted a great deal of grief and reflection in Canada, as we have the Truth and Reconciliation, Day of Truth and Reconciliation coming up at the end of September. What will your party do to move towards or to work towards Indigenous reconciliation?
So I'm just going to say something on a personal note here. When the word started coming out and the news of the bodies, it became real for people. It wasn't just a story that the First Nations were telling. After the sadness in this, and the horror that any people could do this to children in particular, I was appalled by the fact that so many, including my generation, we never got told any of this. This wasn't put out in our history books of Canada. And so this was a complete shock to non-Indigenous cultures, and it should not have been. Canada's history is a mix of good news and bad news and attacks and surviving attacks, and it should all be part of it. We can't cherry pick what part of our history we want to share. So on a personal note, I would like to see our curriculums rewritten to reflect truly the history of Canada and include a huge section on Indigenous. So as far as what my party's plans are, we've been working hard towards reconciliation, and we intend to work even harder. I think one of the things that came out of last night's debate and a few of the meetings that we've had is that we need to address our underlying paternalistic and colonial attitudes. Maybe people don't even know we have them, but it's that whole, oh, I know what you need, I know what's good for you attitude. No, we don't. We haven't lived through what these people have lived through. Why aren't they determining their own future? Why aren't they saying what it is that they need to survive? Being active in bringing back the children, the First Nations children that have been removed from their homes and put into care, taking them from those homes and bringing them back into Indigenous First Nations cultures and society is a first step. But we need to improve the environment that they were taken from in the first place. So we need to not just work harder, we need to ensure that these communities have potable water. The fact that young children are having to figure out how they can get water to drink, and the mothers and the fathers are watching their children sicken, and there's boil water advisories still in so many communities, is appalling to me as somebody who can turn on the tap and get a cold drink of water. The housing situation this is another nightmare. And so yes, our party has made huge commitments to improving the housing, to meeting the needs of the Indigenous communities when it comes to housing, to making sure that we're made allowances for multi-generational families. Because not only do we see that as a cultural issue with immigrants that are coming in, this is how many of our First Nations and Indigenous peoples live.
And
so
I hate to overtalk you, Emily. We're just about out of time.
Okay.
And I want to thank you for your passion and your comments and your information, and best wishes in your campaign.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be passionate.
You're welcome. And thank you, friends, for being a part of Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman. We'll talk again.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Her name is Phyllis Webstead, and she is a survivor from a dark period in Canadian history. Beginning in the 1830s, Indigenous children were taken from their families. They were sent away to residential schools and forced to abandon their traditions, languages, and culture. Phyllis remembers her first day at St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. The year was 1973. She was 6 years old, and she was wearing a new orange shirt, which was purchased by her grandmother. Arriving at the school, she was stripped of her clothes. She never wore that shirt again. To quote Phyllis, "My feelings didn't matter. No one cared, and I felt like I was worth nothing." The last residential school closed in 1996. Phyllis will never forget, nor should we. In 2013, Phyllis started the nationally commemorated Orange Shirt Day. On September 30th, wear something orange.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman. This program is intended to allow each of the candidates in the riding of Bruce-grey-owensound to be interviewed, have their say, and you can make your judgments based on what you see and what you hear. My guest today is Anna Marie Fosbrook from the People's Party of Canada. Anna Marie, welcome. Good to have you here today.
Good morning, David. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Anna Marie, you are not a newcomer to politics. At least you are a newcomer to federal politics. This is your first time, I believe, that you've run in the federal arena, but you're not a newcomer to politics in general. What was the reason you moved from municipal politics to federal politics?
Well, simply put, David, I sat at home like everybody else for the last 18 months, give or take, and decided that I had seen enough. And interestingly enough, when I ran the municipal election in 2014, that was following a lot of commentary that if I wanted to address my concerns at the municipal level, and I quote, "That's what the election is for, dear." So here I am again. I guess that's what the election is for. And I think that it's a very critical time in our history, and I'm happy to represent the People's Party of Canada and the purposes that they represent for Canadians.
So that's your reason, because your own thinking resonated with the People's Party of Canada?
Well, certainly it has in the past. I voted for the People's Party of Canada in 2019 for a number of reasons that I still agree with. And at this time, it's my support of the organization is only amplified given where we're at with a lot of these mandates and jeopardy of losing freedoms in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Of course, you alluded to the fact that we're coming through COVID, and it has certainly had a huge impact on our community and our society. One of the things that COVID has exposed is a significant amount of economic inequity in this country. What will your party do to address the issue of economic inequity? Are there specific programs that you would propose?
Well, I can say, being a newcomer to federal politics, I don't necessarily have personal plans that I can lay out for you. But what I can tell you is that I think it's high time that we as a country took a look at our financial systems, our financial structure, and how sustainable it in fact is. If you want to talk about economic impact, I think that you should be addressing certainly equity for all. And as far as I'm concerned, we're all at financial jeopardy and risk. I mean, I'm convinced that we were all headed for a financial cliff long before COVID came along, David. So, you want to be equitable, treat all Canadians fairly. Let's not print money from nothing. Let's not let inflation run rampant. Let's address the core issues within our financial and economic system, nationally and globally, David.
What will your party do to address? I mean, some of the other parties have proposed things like childcare availability. One party is talking about a guaranteed livable income. Others are talking about various other programs for businesses. Does your party have those kinds of proposals ready?
So some of your questions may venture into jurisdiction that's not necessarily federal, and I'll try to address those anyway. So childcare, I mean, I think childcare is absolutely critical. I think that we're dealing with a situation now where not only are parental rights being diminished, which is of grave concern, but we also have gotten to a point, and again, economically, where it takes two parents to work full time and then some, and they're still not making ends meet. I think most parents, if you spoke to them, would love to care for their own children, or at least have that care remain within their family and close, knit family groups. All that said, if we want to address some of the universal basic income, minimum wage, those sorts of things, I think it's really important to address the fact that how we got here, how we allowed people to temporarily use a welfare system because of circumstance beyond their control, but then when they want to take initiative to move into the job market, they are in fact financially restricted from making that move. So, if I'm making a paltry amount staying at home, and if I want to venture out, if it's going to cost me, or if I'm not going to make the same, one way or the other, we're not encouraging people. We're in fact allowing them to become more and more dependent, which I don't think most people want. I do believe that there are people whose circumstance is unique, absolutely. But I think the vast majority of people want to be productive. They want to have something that they can contribute to every day. And right now, the system really doesn't favor people getting up off some of these programs. So I hope that addresses your question.
Well, it's your answer, I should say. So that's fine. That's fine. One of the things that which you alluded to are, and your party certainly in its platform alludes to strongly, are the various public health measures which we are living with these days, and things like immunization and vaccination certificates. What's your position on those?
Well, I'm going to start by saying that a lot of these mandates, although we see federal influence and provincial influence, we also see apparently a great voice coming from our local medical officers of health, our boards of health. And I don't know if you're aware, David, but not too long ago, the Ombudsman in Ontario stated that, these organizations are in dire need of oversight. Well, I would suggest to you that if we want to talk about people's opinions on mandates and passports, that, for the benefit of having a fair conversation, that, if ever there was a time to have transparency and everybody reading from the same factual source document, now would be the time. People do have questions, and where they have questions and are not ready to provide their informed consent because things are questionable, then I fully support people's choice. And I don't believe that we should really fall into a society where passports are mandatory and we all need to have papers in order to go from A to B. So I support the position of not mandating these things. And perhaps if the medical field, and as well government and media, were a little bit more open to listening to other voices and not vilifying those who question, perhaps you might get more informed consent. But in my view, where information is questionable and asking a question is a bad thing, I cannot support mandatory anything, David, quite frankly.
Would you find where have you found the answers to your questions?
Well, I have to say that a lot of the information has in fact come from individuals sharing their experience, and certainly alternative media sources that I'm unsure why there are, medical individuals, doctors, nurses, who are putting their information out there, and I'm going to say censored because that's what I think it is. But, there's some that take the view that, well, social media platforms can do as they wish because they're not a government organization. Well, whether you call it censorship or suppression, to me, it's the same thing. So there's a lot of sources who are providing different views on the information that the mainstream media is telling us. And I would hope an organization like Rogers would be well aware of some of them.
Well, at this point, we're in the election. We're simply seeking your positions and your platforms and your information. So let's continue. One of the things that has changed or been perhaps a little more drawn out in this election campaign is the level of anger, the level of and the amount of protests. We've had candidates. We've had a lot of vandalism of signs with racist statements. We've racist graffiti. We've had your leader, Mr. Bernier, egged while he was on the hustings. We've had gravel thrown at Mr. Trudeau. We've had racist insults spoken to Mr. Singh. Other candidates have expressed similar experiences. What does your party say about these incidents, and what plans do you have to respond to this kind of a change in our society and maybe work towards a more fair and just society?
Well, I can certainly agree that we need to move toward a more fair and just society, and some of those points I just covered in the last question. I would say this, David, I've yet to meet a People's Party of Canada supporter who's expressed any violence, aggression. And I, for one, am reminding people that, and, here's a perfect example. So Maxime Bernier was arrested. And as he was being arrested, he was asked, do you have any weapons? And his reply was simply, only my words. Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly enough, when I went to retrieve that clip online to share with people, for the very purpose of reminding people that, you know what, we don't need to be angry. We don't need to be aggressive. We need to use our voices. Well, oddly enough, the majority of mainstream media who preserved that clip voiced over what Maxime Bernier was saying. I did find one where people can actually hear what he's saying. Point being that I know that, I got an email from somebody just last night saying, I guess the image was there was a People's Party of Canada sign on the road, and then there was a Liberal sign lying down. And I do know that some of the larger signs took more of a beating in that horrific storm that came through the other night. So I do not believe that People's Party of Canada supporters are looking for anything other than to be heard and to be respected and to be allowed to make their own choices as per our Constitution and our Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm. So your argument is simply that you just want to be heard, correct?
We want to be heard, and we would like to know that when things are being imposed on us, that we have the benefit of all of the information that was used to arrive at this being an appropriate decision. I think that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you've got your leader, I believe, Mr. Bernier, has condemned some of the more vitriolic attacks on various candidates, and having experienced that himself, it's not unexpected. But you're suggesting that some of the more local things are perhaps staged? Well,
I really, David, what examples What examples are you
I'm asking
citing
you for examples. I'm asking you for
Examples of
examples.
what? Examples of what?
Well, let's not go down that alley.
No, no,
Let's
no,
move
no,
on.
no, no. You're asking me for examples of inappropriate behavior?
Sure. Do you have any?
I'm unaware of any
Okay.
where a People's Party of Canada supporter has participated in any aggressive or violent behavior. Are you aware of any, David?
Well, I'm aware that the PPC did remove one of its riding presidents, I believe, down in London, but there is no proven connection between that and anything else. I'm also, and did see myself, signs or T-shirts with and signs with from PPC people at various demonstrations. So you're saying that that's not your experience of the people in your party.
T-shirts that said what, David?
They had the emblem, People's Party of Canada. They were the color of your party. Yes.
Right. And what were these people doing that was so egregious?
I do not know, but I know that they were certain. That was the rally, to be specific, that that had to be canceled. And if you recall, that the Conservative Party also had some experience there.
Well,
So,
I would suggest, David, that you
there?
would know well that there are always there's always a likelihood that you're going to have an agent provocateur in a group.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not suggesting that's always the case. I'm not suggesting that is the case. But what I am saying to you is I have yet to meet a supporter of the People's Party of Canada who is taking any more approach than words and endeavoring to be heard, endeavoring to have and make use of factual information and make clear that they are not willing to give up their freedoms and rights. And I respect that.
That's a very helpful clarification, and thank you for that. That's exactly what I was hoping you would clarify around this issue. Let's change the topic a little bit. We have been warned as a globe by the global community, in the global community, that we're running out of time to address the matter of climate change. What's your party's position on climate change?
Well, if you took the time to read the platform and certainly listen to Maxime Bernier, I do agree that climate is changing. I also agree that it has always been changing. I do not believe that we have a crisis that warrants a state of emergency. And I certainly believe that there are a number of things that can be done at the local level that can influence those things. And, we don't need to go into detail, but, some of the developments and so forth and how we impact our air, land, and water, I think we don't necessarily look at the bigger picture on some of those things. But I also have to tell you, David, I'm not convinced that, cutting a check to the United Nations is going to change our weather. So I think that that's another area where I would love to see source documentation, peer reviewed, all that good stuff, because perhaps in the media, you've been tracking the history of the lament of climate change and climate crisis over the decades, and the world hasn't come to an end yet. So on balance, yes, we should absolutely be respectful of our environment and the impact that we have on it. Should that be at the expense of people's immediate and day-to-day livelihood? Because there are some people who have been decimated by COVID, and there are some people whose livelihoods will be decimated, at least in the short term, by some of these measures. So whatever you're going to do, make sure that it's in line with respecting and allowing people to adapt. I'm just not so sure that we're having the right conversation on a lot of these issues. And I certainly don't think that the information that people are being given, offered on a silver platter, is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, David.
So you would suggest that while climate change is an issue, we have yet to reach the level of a climate emergency or reached a tipping point.
I don't think tipping point, emergency. I acknowledge that there is opportunities for us to address the impacts that humanity is having. I absolutely agree with that. But I think that some of the measures that have been implemented and that are, coming down the pipe have not necessarily been fully disclosed, for one, to humanity that's going to be paying the price. So, with carbon tax, okay, so we're going to pay another tax. Where do I get to reconcile how my dollars were spent? Do I get to see the fine print? I couldn't even see the general ledger when I was mayor of Southgate, David. I think transparency is an issue. And until people get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, climate change and COVID, there's going to be questions. And when people question, don't dismiss them. Answer their questions.
Does your party have any specific proposals for climate change?
Well, like I said earlier, some of these things are more within the jurisdiction of provinces than federal. And at this stage, I'm not necessarily an expert enough to tell you exactly what the line is. I can tell you that whether we're talking about climate change or childcare or even education, whether the federal government has jurisdiction or not, when I'm elected, David, I'm going to express my opinions on all of these matters. And I think it's very important that federal representatives interact regularly with provincial and with municipal. When I was on Grey County Council, we didn't get much audience from our federal representatives. And so these are things that, as far as I'm concerned, jurisdiction aside, there should be more conversation. And those conversations should absolutely include the public who will be impacted, who are being asked to hand over their money, hand over their freedom.
Well, let's move into another area that is certainly in the public sphere these days, and that's the discovery of bodies on the sites of Indian residential schools back in June, which, and the word discovery is probably not accurate because the Indigenous communities have known about the remains for years. But this has prompted a great deal of grief and reflection in this country. What is your party's position, and what will you do to work towards Indigenous reconciliation?
Well, David, I agree with you that, Indigenous populations have known about this for years, and they've been talking about it for years. This was not an epiphany for media, government. So, I think it's somewhat disingenuous to go, oh my goodness, the discovery. Yes, it's now being disclosed. But I had the opportunity to visit Six Nations a few years ago, and one of their representatives pointed and said, that's where the bodies are buried. And I said, an obvious question. Who have you addressed this with? We have addressed it. And they're not listening. So, moving on from that point, I drove up to Cape Croker recently, and there's still a fancy flashing sign that says boil your water. So this is not a somewhere else issue. This is not a, only in Western. This is in our backyard. And how it is that our current government proposes to spend over $1 billion implementing passports to restrict Canadians' freedoms, and we still can't afford to make sure that everybody has clean drinking water. I just can't reconcile that. Now, what will the People's Party of Canada do? Well, I can tell you that given the fundamental principles of respect and fairness, I fully expect and will fully endorse and support and propose that we do give this some serious attention, and not just because of Indigenous people. I have grave concerns, David, that children across our country, regardless of race, color, creed, are in jeopardy for various reasons. It shouldn't be a crime to be poor, David. And if you are losing custody of your child for the wrong reasons, yes, there might be egregious circumstances out there, but if you're losing custody of your child for the wrong reasons and you can't go anywhere for recourse, I mean, that's a fundamental problem. And hopefully people recognize that First Nations, Indigenous people are Canadians just like the rest of us. And if we don't fight for their children's safety, guess what? We're next. So I'm very sympathetic to the cause, but I also recognize, you know, our Indigenous people are not fools. And really all you have to do is have a conversation with them. And a lot of them will tell you, we're not asking for the moon. We're asking for respect.
So your party would support things like treaty rights, respecting treaty rights, and working with the Indigenous community across Canada to move towards reconciliation then?
Well, I mean, there's how many points to reconciliation to state that, yeah, you know, I'm just going to agree to it all, I think would be somewhat reckless. And as far as treaty rights go, I mean, there's documentation that I've been given the opportunity to understand that it, you know, is relevant, remains relevant, and you know, not to further lengthen any process that's already begun. I think it's very important to give these things consideration, but to also recognize that, you know what, time has passed, and on balance, we need to find a way that is in fact going to be fair and gives consideration to not just what has been done, but what should be done going forward. So, you know, if you have people, if you have Indigenous populations who right now don't enjoy the same rights and privileges as other Canadians, well, maybe that's the critical first place to start.
Anne-Marie, we've got about a minute left, and I just wanted to quickly ask you, where can people meet you? Where will you be? Are you outdoor knocking? Are you attending other events? This COVID has thrown the monkey wrench into traditional contact methods for people. So what, very briefly, what are you doing?
So I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question. And what I would say is that, can I ask you a question when I'm done?
Not much time. We're running out of time.
Well,
1 minute.
Bottom line is that if people want to reach me, want to know what I'm doing, my phone number is right on my sign, 519-377-7777. I'm everywhere I can possibly be. Call me. David,
you also have a social media presence?
David, my question for you. Do you believe that the media, Rogers is a huge player, do you believe the media is giving the people the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth on COVID, David?
That's not a question I'm prepared to answer right now, Anne-Marie. I'm sorry.
Well, that's unfortunate, David.
That's not what I'm...
unfortunate.
Okay. Well, we have to go. So
can you address it later? Can you address it later?
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for your time. And thank you, friends, for being a part of politically speaking election. I'm David Shearman. We'll talk to you again.
Can you address it later?
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Hey, did you know?
More than 4,500 Canadians are waiting